Hello, my name is Shauna He, and I am a dietetic intern and a master's candidate at California State University of Long Beach. And today I'm presenting the topic on how to prevent strains and sprains in the food service setting. And I chose this picture because if you're at home making a loaf of bread, it isn't much repetitive motion. It's just a single loaf of bread. But if you look in the picture, this man is making several different loaves, having to make those slashes several different times, and he's probably doing this day in and day out. So you can imagine day to day as he keeps doing that might put some strain on his body doing the same thing every single day. And so we're going to talk about how to prevent strains and sprains that happen in the food service setting. So what is the purpose of this talk? So as you can see on the left, there's some data on the most frequent injuries at Kaiser Downey, specifically from the years 2015 to 2020. And as you can see, contusions, or another word for that is bruises, was the most frequent injury. But after that was the total of sprains or strains. And then after that, if you were to total lacerations, then it would probably be lacerations, and then slips and falls. So you can see here that sprains and strains, either in the back or in your extremities, are quite frequent in the food service setting. So what's the difference between a sprain versus a strain? So on the left, you see in the picture, you can see that it's the ligament. So it's a stretching or tearing of ligaments. And the ligament is the tissue that connects bone. And then on the right, you see the strains, which is tendon and muscle. So it's the stretching or tearing of muscles or tendons. And tendons are the tissue that connects muscle to bone. So what are the causes of sprains or strains? So looking at the data from 2015 to 2020, there are a lot of different reasons for why people got either sprains or strains, but the most frequent cause was the equipment failure, defective equipment or equipment failure. And then second was a tie between repetitive motion and overexertion, and then another reason, and then ties with failure to follow instructions, improper procedure, action of others, and hurried inattention. So how do we prevent these injuries from happening? Recognize the risk factors. So you can see in the image here, depending on the risk factors, either ergonomic risk factors, which are things that happen in the workplace, certain activities that you're doing again and again, versus individual risk factors. You can see poor health, poor physical fitness, poor work practices. So the accumulation of these risk factors lead to a higher risk of, as you can see on the left, musculoskeletal disorder, loss of function, pain, discomfort, and fatigue. So the more risk factors you have on the ergonomic side and the individual side, the more likely it is you are to develop long-term effects. So some of the risk factors that we have here that we talked about in the graph previously was repetitive motion, overexertion, and awkward posture. So repetitive motion, some examples are slicing, dicing, flipping. So in food service, you're doing a lot of the same motions continuously. You're flipping burgers, you're slicing up onions. An example or a way to prevent this from harming your body is to vary up the repetitive activities. So spacing them out, so not doing all of the same repetitive motion activities at the same consecutively. So something that you can do is after you slice onions, maybe you take a break and do something else, and then you would come back and dice, and then you would do something else, and then you would come back and do another activity. So that takes some planning. And then another recommendation is to take breaks and stretch. And at the end of this video, we're going to talk about some stretches that you can do during your break or before your shift. And then another risk factor is overexertion. So example is picking up heavy boxes. And some things that you can do are to bend your knees and use your legs, and then also keep the item close to your body. And when you can, use a cart or hand truck. And we'll talk about some of the ways that you can practice safe lifting in the next slide. And then another risk factor is awkward posture. So an example of this is using equipment that is too short or tall. Then one simple way to fix this is just adjust the equipment height according to how tall you are, and then also organize your workplace so that there's a nice flow to the kitchen. You aren't going back and forth, you aren't having to bend excessive amounts to go down to get certain things, or you don't have to reach for certain things if they're a common ingredient or a common tool that you need. And then also just use a neutral posture. So that's just if you were to greet someone with a handshake while you're standing up, that's an example of what the neutral posture is. So no slouching, no trying to overexert yourself or stretch yourself. So here is what you can think about when you try to lift a heavy box or a heavy object. So first, think and plan. Where is this load going? Do I need assistance? And so this is where you can decide if you need to use a cart or a hand truck. And once you decide the best way to move this object, then you can, and you decide that you want to lift it, you can come close to the load. So you want to keep your head up, keep your back straight, and bend at the knees, almost like you're squatting. And then lift it up with your legs. And when you're moving, pay attention to where you're going. You don't want to twist your torso. You want to shift your feet to turn, just to reduce the risk of straining your back if you were to twist, if you're carrying a heavy object. And then when you're lowering, make sure to use your leg muscles like you did when you were lifting. So use your leg muscles to bring the load down, and then make sure that your fingers are out of the way when you put the load down on the ground. So we're going to jump into a quick activity. So we have an activity here, and then in the next slide we have an activity for you to practice. So this is a stretch that you can do during your break or before your work shift. So feel free to pause this video and practice the stretches as we go, and the activities. So number 1, shake out your arms to relieve tension. And then number 2, perform a prayer stretch. So what you want to do is place your palms together with fingertips pointing toward the ceiling, almost like you're praying. And then number 3, open your arms, and it's like you're going in for a big hug. You want to feel it in your back, by your shoulder blades. And then number 4, make a tight fist, and then straighten your fingers, spreading them apart as much as you can. And then you want to straighten your elbows, make gentle fists, and bend your wrists and hands down. And then you want to continue until a stretch is felt in your forearms. And then some other activities that you can do before your work or during a break is feet press-ups. So place your weight onto your heels and lift your toes into the air, and do that 20 times. And then do the opposite movement on the opposite side of your foot, starting with your toes. This just gets some circulation going in your foot. And then another activity is to do a hip sway. Sway your hips from side to side with a steady motion, and do this for 20 reps. And then you can start rotating your hips in one direction and then the other. And then shoulder rolls. roll your shoulders in a full circle for 20 reps going backwards, and then repeat this for 20 reps going forward. So whatever motion that you do in one direction, you want to do equal amounts in the opposite direction. All right, and that concludes this presentation. I hope you guys all stay safe and healthy during this time, and that this was helpful in preventing any strains or sprains while you're working in the food service industry.